I think that could be promoted.
Yeah, let me. I'm gonna put you on mute here a second, okay,
Go ahead.
Josie?
Go ahead.
Have you ever wondered what has happened to the United States and its once vibrant culture? Have you ever wondered why a virtuous American culture has been in decay for over 60 to 70 years? The book Deus Ex Machina, God from the Machine, explains how foreign belief systems have been imported into the United States by foreign intellectual agents to be used to fundamentally transform the most prosperous and free nation in the world into a typical third world country. Learn how the progressive academics, progressive activists, large corporations, and the mainstream media have become appendages of the federal government, a Praetorian Guard, and an extension of the political vanguard class. Deus Ex Machina exposes the cogs of the machine that progresses our civil society to chaos and subjugation. Get this tool to educate others and illuminate the truth on the battlefield of ideas. Let's make a difference. Get Deus Ex Machina, the progression of secular socialism, from Amazon.com and Lulu.com today.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now. Okay, ready for me to come up? All set. Okay, I'm on the top step. It's a very simple matter to hop down from one step to the next. You get 3 more steps and then it'll open. Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down about the 4th rung up.
What's going on, folks? Welcome to the Battlefield. That's right, this Battlefield Live radio program. We got a great show lined up for you tonight. And got something new for you all. And look, typically if you listen to the program, we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about politics, we talk about philosophy, we talk about culture. And none of those things are mutually exclusive, right? In other words, they all kind of tie together. And if you all don't know me, welcome, first of all. I'm glad to have you on board. If you don't know me, I'm from the New Orleans area, and I was down here during Katrina. And Katrina's coming up. I think it's the 12th year anniversary that's coming up at the end of August, I think it is. And through Lanterns.buzz, I met a really great lady, Josie Jackson. She's going to be on the program tonight. She also experienced Katrina. Who'd have known? We actually been working together and didn't realize that we had gone through similar experiences. So we're going to talk about that tonight. But it's more than just about the story of Katrina. The discussion that I want to have tonight is really to discuss, in context of Katrina as well as Ferguson, we'll see how that ties in together, civil society and how fragile it is. And why is it important for us to really understand that in order to be able to operate in our society, and how do we need to engage with people? You know, we talk about this being the battlefield, but it's the battlefield of ideas. It's not just a battlefield. And we have to have these discussions with people that we may not agree with and get to understand them. We don't have to agree, but understand them, and that way we can engage on those ideas on the battlefield. And that's where we are tonight. Battlefield Live, Chris Pilier, Lanterns Media Network, and we're on the Liberty Eagle as well. Check us out on Facebook Live, Twitter as well. Lanterns Buzz will be right back after this short break. Stick with me.
We're here to fix the machine.
Battlefield Live.
You're listening to the Battlefield Live with Chris Pilier from Lanterns Media Network, the Battlefield Live radio program. I want to thank you for joining us on the Battlefield today, and we got a great show lined up for you today. I want to give a shout-out to everybody on Facebook. We got Mary and PK, Joseph, Joni. God, y'all are lining up. Welcome to the show. Lori, Willie, thank y'all for listening to the program. Let's go ahead and get this thing shared. We got some great stories tonight, things to learn from, and I want to make sure that we set this up properly. But before we do that, as usual, we have to bring the one and only, the illustrious Californian, and that is Susan Swift. What's going on, Susan?
Hey, Chris. I am blessed and highly favored. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm actually doing really, really good because this is the first show in a while that we have actually had a guest from Lanterns Media Network. And, folks, if you're not familiar with Lanterns, yes. If you're not familiar with Lanterns, like the Liberty Eagle, because we are airing on the Liberty Eagle today, Lanterns is another network, and we're all collaborating, working together because of the end goal. The end goal of Liberty Eagle, I've spoken with those folks. That's why we've collaborated, as well as the other networks that are engaged with. We're all about trying to figure out the best way to navigate society, to deal with the stupid politics that we have to deal with sometimes, as well as understand the culture and how do we get things back to where we need them to be. In some cases, we have to grow and we have to morph and turn into a new person or a modification of who we are based on the things that we've learned. And I got a great guest tonight that I've loved reading her work over at Lanterns Buzz. She is a writer at Lanterns Buzz. And after doing some discussions with her about just things that she's working on, come to find out she's from my hometown. At least she's lived there, and she experienced Katrina. So I wanted to bring on Josie Jackson. Josie, you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Josie. So, Josie, number one, thank you for coming on the show because I've been reading your work over at Lanterns, and the last two pieces that you've written, and I know you're working on a third now, have really, really opened my eyes to a different aspect of not only just myself but Lanterns as well. I mean, Lanterns, look, we started off just talking about politics, and then next thing you know, we've brought on some other people that they don't write about politics. They talk about culture. They talk about ourselves and what do we have to do to become better people. In fact, I think it was Christine that just wrote an article on resumes, on how it is that we write great resumes. So kind of give us a set. First of all, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and also let's kind of walk into the article that you wrote, and then we'll get into the Katrina stuff.
Sure. Well, my name is Josie Jackson, and writing and speaking my thoughts about all this is relatively new for me, and it came from the experience I had since Hurricane Katrina and from Ferguson, which we're going to talk about all that. But I grew up going back and forth from New Orleans, Mississippi, and St. Louis, Missouri. And I was able to look at, the different ways people live and the different ways people treat each other. And after Katrina happened, I came up here because the infrastructure, I was on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and my home and the infrastructure of my life was destroyed completely. And there was, parts of my home that was left, but it was not livable. And I had to go, and my mother told me I had to leave.
Wow.
She was in the military, and she told me this was going to be one of the biggest life-changing moments of my entire life, and that I would learn. She's a brilliant woman, and that I would learn so much from it, and that she taught me how to survive, and she did. And from everything from digging holes, keeping a little shovel in my backpack to dig holes, to go potty in and cover it up, to help other people figure out what to do. And but I was on the Mississippi Gulf Coast when it happened, and I kept a journal and was taking pictures. But I stayed, and my mother was, she is a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and so she was doing work with the Red Cross, and so was I. And I got to bear witness to the best of people and the worst of people. And it was absolutely, there's a German word I'm trying to find. It means out of extreme horror can come incredible beauty and healing and love. And I witnessed that. I mean, I saw people come together that would never come together, and I know you saw that too. And didn't you?
Yes, and kind of like, just to kind of, I guess, sprinkle the stories around here. So I'm from the New Orleans area. I lived at the time probably about maybe 15-20 minutes outside of New Orleans, to the west of New Orleans. And literally the night before, I was in this great place called the Swamp Room. I don't know if you've ever been in the Swamp Room. on Veterans. They had the best burgers. We were having a couple of drinks with some friends. And the next morning, I think it was Sunday morning, I get a call from my mother. And she says, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm over at a friend's house." I'm thinking, all right, I don't remember how old I was at the time, but I'm thinking my mother's calling me, trying to figure out where I was at.
Something's going down.
Yeah,
Something's going down.
So she says, "Have you been watching the news?" And I'm like, "No, what's going on?" She goes, "Well, there's a big hurricane coming." I'm thinking, "Oh, okay, a big hurricane. Okay, whatever."
Right.
We've sat these things out in New Orleans many times, and so it was funny because I left my credit card at that place. And didn't have a card. This is one of those things that you don't think about. I didn't have a debit card or credit card for an entire week, and you would believe what it does to you.
Absolutely.
And so we actually evacuated. We went to Jackson, stayed with some friends, and I'll kind of leave that part
Jackson,
there.
Mississippi? You went to Jackson, Mississippi?
Yes, where the eye actually went right over us.
Yeah.
There.
Well, I was in Gulfport, Mississippi, and the eye went over me. But what's interesting is just throngs of people went to Jackson from the Gulf Coast. So,
Susan, where were you during all of that? You were out of state, I imagine.
Yes, that was in 2005, I believe. So
Yeah.
I had already moved out of Texas. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I've been through my fair share of little hurricanes that come on through. But the worst we had was a tropical depression that I cannot remember the name of it. And it just rained like a cow peeing on a flat rock for days and flooded. But it really wasn't a true hurricane. So I missed Katrina, but I think it was one of the 5 deadliest hurricanes that have hit the United States in the history of the United States, right after what is it?
That was Camille.
Hurricane Camille.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
It was a big
People
one.
were still
But I
talking
missed it.
about
I was out of
Camille
there
on the
already.
Gulf Coast when Hurricane Katrina hit. That was still the big one.
Yeah, my dad was in the Seabees with the Navy, and I remember seeing pictures, and not from him necessarily, but pictures of pine needles out of a pine tree, stuck in the side of telephone poles. And
Absolutely.
2x4s run through the side of trees. I mean, to think about the wind, I think it was well over 200 miles an hour, the Camille storm. And, of course, the people that were having the party on the beach that are no longer with us. Things like that we hear these horror stories. So, Susan, were you watching on television kind of how everything kind of unfolded?
I had heard about it. My mom and dad were living down there near there, in Houston at the time, and so I heard about it, and just the devastation and the flooding, and then the aftermath of it. I heard just indirectly, and of course watched a little bit of it. So I guess that was 12 years ago. It's a long time.
So my grandmother and grandfather at the time, they lived, and they've since passed. God bless their soul. They were living in Lakeview. Which is, So what happened, if you all familiar with what happened with Katrina, I'll just kind of give you a little lay of the land of what happened. So, number one, New Orleans and the New Orleans area is well under the sea level. And if you look at New Orleans and you really zoom in, like on Google Maps or something like that, you'll see that everything is surrounded by marsh and swamp. So when the storm came up, it pushed the storm surge in, and New Orleans is surrounded by levees for the most part. And these levees were, basically going back now, they say that they were only ready to stand a level or Category 3 storm. And the storm surge ended up pushing into Lake Pontchartrain, which is the big lake north of New Orleans, and the water flooded. Water came in and pushed against these levees and broke some levees in the area, and that's what flooded New Orleans. And my grandmother's house, give you kind of some perspective. My grandmother's house probably had, like maybe a 1,500 square foot home, nice modest home that they've lived in most of their life. My dad grew up there, and they, think of it, they're in their 80s and they've lived there all their life. They have all their belongings, all these things. They think and they actually went to the Hilton. Check this out, in New Orleans. And that's where we used to always go. Just get up off the ground. That way, if it floods, you don't get wet, right? So they went to New Orleans. They're in their 80s. My grandfather was on this stage of dementia. So he was kind of not all there. And next thing you know, the New Orleans floods, and the electricity goes out in the Hilton. There's people riding, and it's in the Hilton is right on the convention center. So the convention center was where all the real bad stuff was taking place, right there in the Superdome. And so my grandparents, all of their things, everything was under 9 feet of water in their home. And just to kind of speed up the story here, because I don't want to soak up all the time on this one story, but just to kind of give you some idea of what we dealt with.
You got the whole month, because we're working our way up to the end of the month.
So we went to go clean up. We had to wait a week to get into New Orleans because they wouldn't let anybody in. There was people getting shot and killed, and people drowning. I mean, there's 2,000 people died during Katrina in New Orleans. And we were able to get in. Believe it or not, we have family that worked for Exxon, and we just happened to get a pass to go to the plant, and then we swung by my grandparents' house. And we went in, and they had these beautiful oak floors in their house. And the oak floors had soaked up all this water, and they buckled up about 3 feet. And we could see the water line, and there was a dining room chair that I had sat on many times, Christmas dinners and eating oyster patties and gumbo and things like that. And there's this chair hanging from the chandelier. And I remember opening the door and just this musty smell, and just seeing my grandparents' life, literally all their belongings, because that's not all their life. They have their memories in themselves, but all of their belongings completely and utterly destroyed. And so this is what I want to do. I want to kind of leave you all with that. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the civil society and how fragile New Orleans was at that time, and actually what took place, and what do we have to do with the next thing that comes to our front door like Katrina. So folks, stick with us on the battlefield. We'll be right back after this short pause. Battlefield Live, Chris Pilier, Lanterns Media Network with Susan Swift and special guest Josie Jackson from Lanterns Media Network. We'll be right back.
Lanterns illuminating the truth.
People often ask me, they say, Chris, how is it that we can change the minds of many in this country? And I say, well, you first don't start with the mind. You have to start with the heart. You don't change minds without changing hearts. And that's what we're going to do. It wasn't that long ago that you might have not have had hope for the country, and all of a sudden you have a change of heart. We'll expect that other people right now feel the same way that you used to. It's those people that we have to reach out to. It may be you that we have to reach out to. So it's our task to form a community, a group, unified behind principles, unified behind what has made America the country that it is now. It's about liberty. It's about freedom. And everybody wants to experience this. We just have to show them how. It's about you being a lantern shining out the light of truth. And we can bring this all together in one place. It's truly about the shining city on the hill. Hope is not in the hands of someone else. It's within ourselves. It's within our hearts. It's within our minds. And it's about utilizing those things in order to be able to make us free.
Lanterns illuminating the truth. Battlefield Live.
Battlefield Live, Chris Pilier, Lanterns Media Network. What's up? So, got some great stuff we're talking about tonight. If you are listening, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to give a shout out to Enola Gay, as well as who's else? It's AJ. What's going on, AJ, over at Lanterns Buzz? Want to thank y'all for joining us on the battlefield tonight. Got a ton of stuff left to cover, and I just want to give out a couple things here real quick. I guess be considerate taking care of some business. Look, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you check us out on our social media. You can find me at Paul Revere again on both Facebook and Twitter. You can find Lanterns at Lanterns Buzz on Facebook and Twitter. Of course, make sure if you're not on Liberty Eagle, go to the Liberty Eagle on Facebook. Check them out. And Susan, where can they find you on social media?
They can find me on social media at Real Susan Swift. That's on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. You can also go to my website, susanswift.net, and that'll connect you to where I write and do things.
Awesome. And Josie, where can they find you on social media?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I've got and Josie Jackson Lantanier and Josie Lantanier at Josie Lantanier on Twitter.
Awesome. And I also want to give a shout out to Wendy and Mitch over there on Lanterns Buzz on Facebook. So, all right. So one more thing. If you like the show and you want to tune in to our podcast, feel free to check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Player.fm, SoundCloud, YouTube. We're everywhere. Check it out. Just do a keyword search for Lanterns Buzz with 2 Z's. Okay, so I want to jump right back into this because I want to get into the meat of really what we're discussing, because these experiences, these stories, and we could talk about these all day, and they're scary at the same time. They're eye-opening. But I think one of the things that opened my eyes the most, and Josie, you explained that you had a life-changing experience, as did I, is that, when I was up in Jackson and I'm watching on television, and I'm kind of like in this, I guess you could say it was like in a surreal place. I'm watching places that I know, street corners that I've been on, to get on the bus and things like that in New Orleans, or, right. The French Quarter and restaurants that I've eaten at, hotels that I've stayed at, the convention center where I've walked along to go to, to Mardi Gras and things like that. And I'm sitting there watching on television where people are literally begging to be saved. They have no food, no water, and they're crying out for government to come in and save them. And they're cursing the government that let people, starve or not have water and all these different things. And my first thoughts were, wow, this is like watching some really bad horror film on television with all these poor people that are down there. And then it comes to, I realized that this is really happening, and the water filling up streets that I've driven my car down, and all these terrible things, and it's like all of a sudden overnight, people were watching television and spending time with their family, and the next day they don't know where they're going to get their next meal.
Absolutely.
So is that kind of the way you saw what was going on?
Well, what I witnessed was that there's that group of people that leave, and then the group of people that stay, because we, and you've experienced, it's like, oh, there's a hurricane coming. I was taking a belly dance class, and on the coast you get the, okay, if you're gonna leave, this is the last hour. There's a countdown to where you can get on the highway and get out of here. Otherwise, you're going to have to hunker in.
Right.
And my teacher stopped the class and said, "Hey, look, y'all, if you need to go, you go now, because this is it, because it's coming. And if you wait any longer, you're not going to be able to get out of here." And so there's that moment. And even though I knew there's that moment, and my mother had been talking to me about it, and I had begun, and we always had this thing, because I was on her about helping me board up the house, because I was right on the water. And she would always, have to take off. She was in the military and busy, and I got real good at it. Well, I noticed that a lot of people were gone, but I also noticed there was a lot of people that were staying. And a lot of people that were staying either didn't have money, or they had a great purpose. They had something they had to accomplish by staying. Or they were the older people, okay? And then there was a group of people that did not want to go to shelters, didn't have the money to go, and also it behooved them to go, because they could make money staying, because they were part of the element that was taking advantage of the situation. And people that were drug addicts, or people that, had a different agenda about the whole thing, knew it was a great opportunity. And on the Gulf Coast, there was actually a place where people stood at a four-way stop with submachine guns. Yes.
Wow.
And they stopped people and say, okay, give us what you got, and you need to, go on down the road, or they would take their gas, and it would change, from moment to moment. And my mom was, working in, the psychiatric shelter, and it just started getting really busy. And after it hit, there was, that 30-foot storm surge, and, there was the water element. And I was doing perimeter checks and trying, because I knew businesses and people and businessmen. I knew who had a warehouse and who had, one of those, machines
Josie,
that could lift things up, and I knew there was an oxygen tank company, and I lined them up. And so a lot of it was recreating an infrastructure again. But in the middle of all of that was, great devastation and death, and no food, no water. And I remember waiting for, I think it was about 5 hours one day, and I was just waiting, and the car in front of me, right when I got to there, they stopped them because they ran out of water. And it's like, what do you do? Sorry, no room at the inn. And it reminded me when Katrina was over, and it was about a month and a half later, and I actually had to send proof of life to the state line to prove that I was alive, so that some relatives could come fetch me.
Wow.
But oh yeah, that was surreal. But what had happened?
Josie, how long were you essentially on your own after the storm came in and everything's devastated? How long did you have to just survive?
A month and a half.
And what did you do specifically,
frankly,
to get
as
water?
Bad as Orleans was, everybody went to New Orleans, and nobody came to the Mississippi Gulf Coast for 2 solid weeks.
Right.
And during that time,
what did you do during that time for you personally? What did you do to survive, and how did others around you survive without, the government, without people hanging around and doing for them? What did you all do?
Well, the first thing you do is you find your people. And, I right before the towers came down, the cell phone towers came down, I could not stay at my house because it was south of the tracks, which was right on the water.
Oh, wow.
And so a very dear friend of mine who was in a wheelchair, and he wasn't going to go. And I wanted to make sure he was okay. And so he was north of the tracks and up high. But my home got hit, and then my home got looted 3 times. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. But the thing that you do when you're trying to survive is first you do a head count. You find out where your people are. And my last conversation was with one of my best girlfriends, Shannon, and she had just told me about her daughter. The best network in the world is a 15-year-old with a cell phone, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm telling you, I heard this story that, there was this young married couple, and they were stuck in the roof of their house, and they didn't have a hatchet to break out of the roof of the house, and they had a 3-month-old baby. And they had to figure out a way to get out. And she was telling me this story. And before the tower came down, I hurried and got off the phone. I was trying to call the powers that be. And then somewhere I heard, call my father. Well, what's my father going to do? He's up in St. Louis, Missouri. So, but I called him and I said, Daddy, you gotta call back from out of state because I'm not making a connection and I don't know if it'll work. But he tried and he made calls to make a connection of this address. All I had was the address. Mm-hmm. So I pretty much was, I felt like I was
you created a network. What you did is you went outside of the blast zone, if you will. You went outside of where the hurricane had devastated things, and you called other people outside to bring in help. And it wasn't through the government. You contacted other individuals, human beings, who could mobilize much more quickly than a federal government or even a state could to try to get help for those who were stuck. You went outside of the system, in other words.
Well, a lot of things went back to the old-fashioned way because when I first, the hurricane wasn't over, and I knew I had to check on this family, and I was in a Jeep, and I was 5 minutes out of the house where I was when a woman flagged me down out of the road, and she was screaming to help her son. And he was down the street, and he had gotten out of the house and was trying to move something off of the roof and fell. And he broke his neck, and he was laying there, and his mama was on one side, and his wife was on the other side, and his 3 little kids were in front of him. And I knew when I looked at him, his pulse was still going, but I saw cerebral spinal fluid coming out of his ear. And
oh, wow.
And I bent down, and there's a reason I'm telling you this story. I would have never guessed that I'd be breathing into some man's mouth that I'd only seen raking his yard, okay? Mm-hmm. And I bent down, and he had been partying for Hurricane Katrina because I could smell it and I could taste it. And I leaned in and I said, Brother, I'm going to breathe for you. I know you can hear me, but I'm going to breathe for you. And then I leaned in and I said, I'm going to breathe for you because you're in front of your children and your wife. And I'm going to keep things going till the ambulance comes. And I remembered that the ambulance was going to be stationed at a school nearby, and I sent some children to go run and get the ambulance. And I remember for 23 minutes, and I had just had a pedicure, mind you, and I had, my shoes were gone, and my feet were in the cobblestone, and I broke every single toenail, bending over, breathing into this man. And they don't teach you what happens when their lung is partially collapsed and the ribs are broken, and you're breaking ribs at first to make sure everything's going. But I knew, and I told him I was going to do my best to keep him alive, at least in front of his children, because I knew, and I felt like somehow he knew that he was going to go. And his mom was screaming in my ear on one side, and his wife was on the other. And there was something that rose up within me that was other than myself. And there was another awareness that started to develop from that point, that I was watchful and seeing, and the things that you went through and the things that we all go through. And even if you're not in a Katrina, you know, you're in your life, there's things that start to happen that kind of raise you up to a different awareness, to rise up. And you do things that you absolutely would never see yourself doing. And the ambulance came, and I moved on, and he died, and I knew he was going to die.
Wow. But
he didn't die in front of his children. And even still, when I drive past that mound where he was on, I thank him that we had a moment where I don't ask me how, but I knew he was working with me. We were trying to keep it together. And then I moved on, and then the next thing happened, and the next thing happened, and when you ask what do you do when you're in a situation like that, it's triaging. Literally every 5 minutes something weird is happening, and that's what happened. It just kept happening, and then there would be more spaces in between it where you could look around, and you make sure you're safe, you make sure you have water. You know, the first time I was out, I wasn't wearing a weapon. I soon learned I had to wear a weapon, and I wore it upon my chest. I had a .357 Magnum K-frame that was rearranged with the holster so it fit right across my heart, and it was gargantuous. But it saved my life, and I learned what it was like to be in martial law, and people try to take away, you know, certain things that are, you know, guaranteed to you, because when it comes down to the thick of it, things will turn on a dime on you. And there are those people I think I had mentioned, where they were stealing with submachine guns, and at night, you know, and even during the day, very brazenly, people would just walk up to you and take what they wanted or do what they wanted. And you had to find something that grounded you. And as silly as it sounds, you know, aside from my prayer, journaling and documenting what was going on. And the first thing people said to each other was, you know, do you have water? When did you drink water last? When did you sleep last? When did you eat last? Do you need a place to lay down and sleep for a little bit? I'll make sure you're safe. And then maybe you would find out their name or where their people were from. And then you started to see the separation of the worker bees and the people that were truly victimized, and the people that were hurting, and basically, that picture of the goats that get froze up and fall over, that's on the web right now.
Yeah.
They toss a ball and they freeze up and they fall over. Well, there are people that do that.
Right.
I mean, I was going into their house, and okay, you got to come out. It's too hot. Right. You got to come over here and create a perimeter check. And where, you know, was there any retired veterans who had weapons? You know, there was no reason for people to be in certain neighborhoods. You had to really kind of be on top of that, and line up people who had something that they could offer to help the community, like oxygen or a warehouse for the Red Cross to bring, you know, porta showers in and things like that. And it was something that just developed.
Let's do this, Josie. We're going to take a break, because I know there's a lot of stuff we're sharing here. This is an incredible story. I mean, I never knew that you had gone through all of this. It's fascinating, scary, and revealing, and oh man, I mean, there's all these emotions that I'm having right now. I can't even collect them all together.
Well, take a moment and breathe, because there's a bigger picture here. Just take a moment. Feel your tailbone while you're sitting in the chair. Those are just stories.
So let's do this, folks. We're going to take another quick break. We're going to come back. I also got something to share, too, I want to talk about and kind of parse these stories together. Stick with us on the battlefield. We'll be right back.
Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Battlefield Live.
When the federal government that is intended to protect the people grows and grows and grows out of control and spreads across the boundaries that are put on it by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, this is what happens. All of the good intentions that have been put into the NSA and all these different agencies and all these different tentacles of the Leviathan that we call the federal government, they're now being used against us. The good intentions have bled out. Now they become arms of political power. So as the Trump administration's coming in and the Obama administration's going out, the Obama administration used tactics in order to try to undermine and delegitimize Donald Trump. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, whether you're an Obama supporter or not, think about that for a moment. That your tax dollars, your rights that you have given to the government, for the most part, in order to so-called, quote-unquote, protect you from evil terrorists, have been used against you, the American people. And just because you didn't support Trump doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you. Because guess what? The next guy that comes into office, and he's a Democrat or a progressive, what do you think Donald Trump's going to do? If he's got his establishment out there. I'm not saying he's going to do it, but he could. And there's precedent for it. If we don't talk about this right now, and we don't get our federal government in order, this is going to continue. It's only going to get worse.
Lanterns changing hearts to change minds.
Lanterns illuminating the truth.
Battlefield Live, Chris Pilier, Lanterns Media Network. Thank you for joining us on the battlefield, and we're joined tonight with, well, of course, the one and only Susan Swift from Politichicks and Lanterns Buzz, and we're also joined on the radio with Josie Jackson from Lanterns.buzz. Folks, I want to do this. I want to, we got about literally maybe 15, 20 more minutes, so I want to get to... I want to mention one story, but I want to kind of bring this home and kind of talk about what we have to prepare for, what we have to expect when something like this was to happen, and what do we have to be careful about. Number one, we had a flood here last year. I'm trying to think of the month. It seemed like it was yesterday, but we had a lot of rain that just hung over southern Louisiana, and there was a flash flood. For the most part, they say it was 1,000-year flood, and if that doesn't make you go, whoa, that was a serious flood, and most people didn't even hear about it. It actually did more damage to homes than Katrina did.
Wow.
And the real estate of this particular flood was 10 times what Katrina affected in the New Orleans area, not other areas as well. So I don't want to minimize Katrina, but more people did die in Katrina than died in this flood. And I think the thing that I learned on this, and I live about maybe 5 miles from where the deepest part, I guess you will say, this flooded area was, and we were about a foot away from getting water in my home. And I'm going to tell you what we did, and this kind of rings back to what, Josie, you were talking about, how the community came together. And what I think, Susan, what you were getting to is, what did we do? Did we wait for the government? No, we actually went and created our community. We created a group down here, and it was like spontaneous, called the Cajun Navy, okay? And
I've heard of that.
Yes, so
that was you?
I was one of them.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I was one of many.
I bet you didn't ask any of them who they voted for, did you?
No, not one time. And my friend Rob Goday, who runs Goday Media, he's also one of the founders of the Cajun Foundation. I think it's the Cajun. God forgive me for not remember the name of it. But basically, he's really into the crowdfunding and crowd relief is what he's basically coined this term, where they're creating the network to be able to go and help people without having to rely on the government, right? And so what the Cajun Navy did, and I'll tell you a real quick story. I had a friend of mine call me from Lafitte, which is basically like an hour and a half from where I live, and he called me and said, dude, what are you doing over there to help people? And I'm like, well, we're trying to get some people together to go out. This water is rising fast. People are stuck in their homes. There's elderly people and children with their parents, and they can't get out of these homes, and water's, they're up on their roofs and things like that. And he said, look, I'm going to come over there. I got a boat. It's like, okay. So he comes over, picks me up. We get in his boat. Or get in his truck and drive to a place, launch off of Highway 42. Okay, so think of a state highway, and we back the boat up on the highway and launch the boat right on the highway. And we get in his boat, we go to the Amite River, and I was scared as hell because this water's rushing quick. And we're going like through people's yards in a boat. And we several times we hit mailboxes, and we didn't realize there were mailboxes. But we actually, the prop of the boat hit mailboxes. That's how high the water was in this little area. And I remember pulling up on this lady's front porch. We put the boat, basically docked it on her front porch. And I'm looking at the house, and I'm like, well, it looks like she probably has a couple of feet of water in her house. And she comes out, and she's carrying a big bag of stuff. Her most precious things, right? And think about this. You have all this stuff, but it's like if you can only grab one handful of stuff before you could possibly die, what do you grab, right? So she grabs like some clothes, maybe some toiletries or whatever, just to kind of try to keep some comfort, pictures. And she gets in the front of the boat, and I'm trying to comfort her because I'm feeling really, really bad for her, And she's got her dog. Her boyfriend comes in, gets in the boat, and I said, look, are you okay? Do you need any help? No. You just please, thank you for picking us up, God. You've saved our lives, this and that. And I said, me, the optimist, the eternal optimist. I look over to her and I said, look, it looks like you probably have about a foot of water in the house. Things should be okay. It's going to be okay. And she goes, that's the second floor. They had a foot of water in the second floor of her house. Her whole first floor was underwater. She said she lost her Mercedes-Benz. Fairly well-to-do, right? Mercedes-Benz. She had a Hummer. She had jet skis, a ski boat, a bunch of stuff. She lost all these things, and she's carrying a plastic bag with the only thing that she could really carry.
I want to know what's in the bag. I want to know what she chose. I know what I grabbed.
So, Susan, what would you choose? What would you, if you had to grab one small bag of things, what would you grab from your house? So hold on, Susan.
Let's say all the kids are in the house and think.
Okay.
Gosh. I would try to grab like my storage devices from my computer, so I'd have my pictures and my memories from kids, although a lot of that is already uploaded and things. If it had to be things, I don't know, I'm not that attached to things. I think I would try to get maybe old family pictures that aren't preserved, something like that. But almost everything can be replaced. Almost everything can be replaced.
So I had a friend that I worked with that lived in Chalmette, okay, and Chalmette went underwater. And he told me this story. He said, look, I was out in the front of my house after the storm went through. So basically the sun was out. Okay, think about you're like, whew, I was in the heart of the storm. We muscled through it. We lived. It was scary as hell. Go out to the front to go check on some neighbors. He said he got out to the street and he heard this noise. He couldn't figure out what it was. It was like this rushing noise, right? This swirling around noise. And he looks up the street, and there's literally a wall of water coming his way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, think of looking down the street and seeing a wall of water like 8 feet tall. And that's basically what he saw.
That's what people saw. One of my landlords, one of my old landlords, she was mean as a snake, but I still feel bad for her. She was in her house, and a big wave. And, I mean, she was, 1,000 feet from the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And she was with her dog, and the wave hit her wall. And I know because I heard the story, she survived. But the wall came right down, and she fell on her back door with her dog and surfed. Thank you very much. The woman surfed on her back door.
Wow. Yeah, so this guy, he turned around and he ran into his house. When he got to the front doorstep, the water was at his feet. When he got to the top steps in his house, the water was at his feet. That quick. He went up into the attic, and luckily the water didn't get to the point where it would have drowned him in his attic. And he was able to get out. So let's talk about it like this. So I want to move to this.
I want to tell you one thing first.
Sure, go ahead.
It's the last thing my mama told me right when she was leaving, and it's based on what you just said. As she took a magic marker and wrote my Social Security number on my head and lifted my shirt and wrote it on my body, she said, do not stay in a room where there's water pouring in, because I don't want to have to look for your head, because your body and your noggin will separate because you get thrown around in a room. So if the water comes in the room, you dive out a window, you do whatever you can to get out of that room. But my mother wrote my Social Security number on my head and on my belly so that she could put my parts together if she had to.
Oh, wow.
Well, actually,
Susan.
that's one of a smart thing to do with little kids when you're traveling with kids, or if you're going, like, we've been to different parks or things. When you've got little tiny kids, you write your cell phone number on, like, their diapers or on the back of their back, so that if they're found, somebody can call you if they're lost. And that's just one of those basic things that you can do. That's a really smart idea. We've done that with our kids when we've gone places, so that's a good thing. But the important thing to take away from this is because we all have events like this in our lives where
that's right,
some sort of tragedy starts. But the important thing to take away from this is looking forward. We have to learn from these things. Things like this are going to strike. Disasters come. The bigger question, though, is in our civil society in America. Our American civil society is very, very fragile. It depends upon the goodwill and the good nature and the honor and the integrity of you and me and people listening, and our churches and our civil institutions, our private institutions. It's not going to depend on government. I don't think that Adam Schiff, pencil neck, my congressional representative, is going to be paddling in a boat if California gets flooded again from water. We're not going to count on the federal government. We're foolish to do so. And those folks that were in Katrina, even when they counted on the federal government, they were disappointed. 35,000 of them were displaced to the Superdome in Houston, Texas, and were there for weeks just waiting for help there. So you can't count on other people. You have to count on yourself, and you have to be the person who is going to help. And the thing is, these local things that happen, like Katrina, is certainly a disaster, or Sandy, or an earthquake, which could happen out here in California. And we can all maybe get on cell phones, or we have plans to call people, might be in Colorado or Kansas or somewhere, to come help. But what if, and this is kind of a bigger topic, what if with Obamacare, that is still the law of the land. It has not been repealed. Our GOP is letting us down. They've promised for 7 years that they were going to repeal it, and now we know that there are betrayers and they're not going to repeal it. When Obamacare begins to unravel and begins to swirl down and crash the healthcare system, which it was designed to do, and we actually have to have a choice of, do we go for single payer or not? When that starts affecting our markets and people voluntarily they start saying, I can't pay the premiums. I can't pay it, and I can't pay the tax fine. I can't do it. If we get to that point, the government's not going to be any help, nor can it be a hindrance to it. What is the IRS going to do? Is the IRS going to come to all of America and say, you owe us your taxes because you didn't pay your Obamacare fee? It's a tax because Justice Roberts said that it's a tax. No, they're not going to do that. What they're going to do is we are going to have to pick up our private economy, our capitalism, and we're going to have to, you and I, we're all going to have to dig in, and we are going to have to make it happen again. We have to be the security of our nation. Individuals, once again, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the gifts of God, our gifts, and we are going to do it through our churches, through our friends, and through being God-fearing people and loving people, and going to our neighbor who's the Democrat up the street. I'm surrounded, and saying, hey, are you okay? If you're not, coming to me. One quick story about living through the floods in Texas when we went through hurricanes and things. There was a Cajun man. I forgot his name. I was a kid, as a teenager, and we had a huge flood. It was that big flood. It was a hurricane that never became a hurricane. It's a tropical depression peeing like a big cow on a flat rock. Anyway, so it flooded for days, and electricity's gone. He was a deep sea fisherman, and he had a huge cache of fish in his freezer. Well, of course, the freezer electricity had gone out, and it was thawing. Yeah. And he said, he called everybody in the neighborhood together, and he says, we're going to have ourselves a fish fry, and we're going to eat.
Yes,
we're going to eat.
I saw that happen a lot.
Whoa! Wait, we're going to have to hear the end of it. And we're going to eat till we hurt ourselves. And that's what we did. And he organized, he had a big cauldron full of bubbling oil, a butane lighter, thing underneath it, and we all shook the fish in, and coated it, and we dumped it in the big cauldron, and we ate till we hurt ourselves. But that was one man. That was a Cajun man, a very good Cajun man, and he fed an entire neighborhood because of a flood. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to be prepared to do for our neighbors and for our country, to save them from the socialism that is going to be bigger than Katrina when it hits.
Absolutely. Yes. One of the best stories that I had after that flood, Susan, was similar to what you had. I had a lady, I still remember her name because her name is the same as my wife's, Barbara. And Barbara lives down the road from us, and we went to go check on people down that street. And when we went there to ask her if she needed help, she said, no, but do you need some food, baby? She says, I got some gumbo. We just cooked some gumbo. You got to take some of this gumbo. And she's standing in ankle-deep water. The water is rising. It is going into her house, and she is wanting to make sure that I have a full belly. And I'm like, this is not only New Orleans, and it's not necessarily it wasn't in that area, but Louisiana, it's the South, but it's America. This is what America is about.
It's just people fed people.
Yes.
I remember this guy came along, and he had a hot dog. And he said, you want some of this hot dog? And it was a hot dog. And we sat there on the curb, and it was like we had communion eating that hot dog.
So if there's anything that I think that we all need to take from this, and in all these experiences, if you haven't experienced something like this, it's something, and it's not something that you want to wish on yourself, but you learn so much about yourself and your community. And at the end of the day, the thing that just sticks with my mind when we talked about just now, Josie, is that you, and we got literally a minute here, you said that the guy that you were trying to keep alive was a guy that you saw cutting his grass. Mm-hmm. And so what I thought about is that if I was in your situation, and that's probably about the only time I ever saw that guy and knew him, I would think that I did the best that I could do. But one of the most upsetting things that I can think about was that I didn't have an opportunity to really know who that guy was, and that I had been basically one of the last people on earth that guy had seen. And so that what it tells me is that even when you're doing something that is heroic, that there's this somber kind of feeling that you gotta meet your neighbors. You gotta know who they are. You gotta look. Mm-hmm. You gotta speak. Put the cell phone down and get out of in front of the television and go walk to your neighbor and say, hey, how's everything going? And get that community feel, because you're gonna need that community at some point.
Absolutely.
Right.
But you know what, you guys?
The people.
I got good news for you. Mm-hmm. We live in the greatest community ever on the face of the nation. And it is called America. And every time the world needs us, we come. We helped Europe. We saved Europe. We defended against Nazism and socialism and tyranny. And we will do it again. And if any of our American fellows, any countrymen are hurt or need help, we come. We are Americans. We can overcome together. We shall overcome. And we will never, ever, ever give up. Ever.
Awesome. Susan, where can we find you on social media? That's to get more of that, because we need more of that.
We will. You can find me on social media at Real Susan Swift, and you can also find me at susanswift.net and on Real Susan Swift on social media.
Josie, where can they find you on social media?
Josie Jackson, Facebook. I'm there.
Awesome. Folks, you can find me at Paul Revere again. I want to thank you for joining us on the battlefield today. It was a great show. Had a lot of fun. Find me at Paul Revere again, Facebook, Twitter. Find us at Lanterns Buzz on Facebook and Twitter, and make sure you go to lanterns.buzz. Josie writes there, I write there, Susan writes there. Make sure you check out all of the work, and there's tons of other people there. Make sure you give kudos and shout out to the Liberty Eagle for giving us the opportunity and the platform to speak about the truth. And we'll be back next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, here on the battlefield. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you later. Tater.